Hello, everybody, and welcome into the recruiting rundown here on Gamecock Central. Kendall Smith and Wes Mitchell coming at you here with a recruiting rundown as promised. Wes, we didn't do it last week, but we are back here this week. A huge weekend for South Carolina taking on Ole Miss Saturday at 3:30 at Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia, South Carolina. And we've talked about recruiting quite a bit, not only on the recruiting rundown, but on GamecockCentral.com. And something that we talked about that was so important for South Carolina was getting off to a really good start and how that can really help momentum for the Gamecocks when it comes to recruiting. They're just coming off of a bye week. Shane Beamer and his staff very busy on the recruiting trail. And you have to think that they're using this 3-1 record and this really good start to hopefully kind of use that to persuade some recruits to come to South Carolina. So how much momentum, Wes, do you think has built from South Carolina starting off the season the way they have, and how is that affecting recruiting right now?
Yeah, Kendall, I want to encourage everybody out there who is a recruiting fan, go check out what we have on GamecockCentral.com. Look at the expected visitors list for this week. We're going to go into some of those guys here in a moment, but you are actually kind of seeing that momentum that we anticipated possibly happening, taking place in reality. And a lot of that has been, hey, we all know this was a disappointing season for South Carolina last year. And to be completely honest, other programs are using that against South Carolina on the recruiting trail. If you look at this past summer, Carolina's battling with top programs from all around the country. They won some of those battles. They missed on some of those battles. Some of those competitions we're seeing actually continue into now, which we're going to get into one of those here in a second. But I think the 3-1 start, even the loss, as we know, was highly competitive, great atmosphere. This is a South Carolina team that has competed every single game so far this year. They're going to have to obviously keep that going, Kendall, but it was told to us, me and Chris Clark, several times going into the season, hey, if we can win, if we can get started with a kind of on a high note, then we feel really good about either A, flipping some recruits, or B, maybe a couple of guys pop back up onto the radar. And that's been the case so far from South Carolina. And I'm sure over there in the ops building, they're pretty excited about what has started to take place the last, I would say, couple of weeks on the recruiting trail for South Carolina.
We love to talk about those recruits that South Carolina could potentially flip. And someone who just recently decommitted from Florida State, Malik Clark, 2025 four-star wide receiver. He is a guy that could definitely see himself at South Carolina. So Wes, he committed committed to FSU, decommitted. Now, what is his status with South Carolina? A lot of people saying that there's a good chance he could become a Gamecock.
Yeah, and I agree with those people, Kendall. I've been checking in with people I know up in Rock Hill. And so you can follow the visits here. Like it looks pretty obvious. He visits South Carolina. He decommits from Florida State. He's supposed to be back on campus this week for the Ole Miss game. And so in this case, sometimes we'll be like, hey, don't read between the lines here. This one, you can absolutely read between the lines. I think South Carolina is in outstanding shape with Malik Clark. And really going into his original commitment, there was a stretch there where we really thought it was going to be South Carolina. Florida State made the late push, got his commitment. But it just goes to show you, like, I feel like one game, one loss does not really affect a recruit's decision. But just look at the comparison of what Florida State's season has looked like, what South Carolina's season has looked like. That gives you some great ammo if you're Carolina, especially if, I'm not saying this is the case, but if FSU would have happened to have been saying, hey, we went undefeated during the regular season last year, South Carolina didn't make a bowl game. If that was any part of their pitch, that kind of goes out the window with the way these two programs have started the 2024 season. So Mike Furry, the wide receivers coach, we'll talk about him with some of these other guys as well, Kendall. He's done a fantastic job. Shane Beamer was in Rock Hill last week and visited Rock Hill High School. And so you can see how much of a priority this kid is for South Carolina. I just kind of reading between the lines on my end. I don't think it's going to be long before Carolina has a chance to just lock him up and add him to their commitment list in this case.
Well, speaking of in-state guys and wide receivers, you just kind of teased it there a little bit. Donovan Murf, four-star wide receiver, just reclassified from 2026 to 2025. He goes to Irmo. So this is Big news, because obviously changing your graduation year is a big deal, especially when the 2025 class, they're seniors here now. So they're graduating this upcoming May. What's going on there? Why did he reclassify, and how could that potentially affect South Carolina?
Yeah, I think, Kendall, this is going to be a trend we start to see more and more of with guys just in general. You look at Ryan Williams at Alabama, who's doing it on such a high profile level. Donovan Murf was actually at that game, the Georgia-Alabama game last week, and of course had a fantastic time, as any prospect would who went to that game. And, I think you're going to see prospects say, look, even if my high school is in one of those states where you can go ahead and participate in financial NIL deals, I can go ahead and get a head start on college if I'm physically ready, if I'm mentally ready, and go ahead and start to, go ahead and start that 3-year clock before you go to the NFL, but B, also go ahead and start having NIL deals. So I think not just for Murph, but for a lot of prospects, it's going to be something you want to highly consider if schools are willing to bring you in early. And so that's something here people have sort of said, well, hey, does this help? Does this hurt South Carolina? I would say it definitely doesn't hurt. It maybe helps them because they are fully willing to go ahead and bring him in as essentially a full 1-year early enrollee. We see early enrollees a lot now coming in January, but this is obviously a full reclass for Donovan Murf. There was some Clemson buzz early. It's been a little bit of Alabama buzz online after that visit, but he's expected back at Williams-Brice Stadium this week when South Carolina plays Ole Miss. And I tend to think right now, as we sit here, October 4th, that this is a South Carolina-Alabama battle. And you can never, even without Nick Saban, you can never completely count out Alabama. But this one, based on everything I've heard, leans towards South Carolina as well. So I think, you look at in-state recruiting at that wide receiver position, you could potentially add Malik Clark, who's the top receiver in state for 2025. Now Murf, who was one of the top guys for 26, classes back to 25. You could land him, obviously. And then there's another kid, Jordan Gidron, who is at Ridgeview High School, class of 2026. He's a 4-star wide receiver. He's been at South Carolina multiple times already this year, has been one of those guys that pretty much shows up at every home game. So I think you can kind of follow the visits there as well, that Carolina has positioned themselves in a good spot with him. So you are seeing that momentum build in a general sense, but also at that wide receiver position as they've had a chance to possibly just sort of flip that room in terms of their high school recruiting.
It's good when you have the momentum going, but you got to keep it going. And that's key for South Carolina and this weekend, Wes. And you know it, and everybody knows it. It's so big for the Gamecocks. You're taking on a team like Ole Miss. And yes, they are coming off of a loss against Kentucky, but still a fantastic program. And I know that all of Gamecock Nation is so excited for this weekend. First time in a while that Ole Miss has come to South Carolina. So a lot of excitement surrounding this game, and that's for the recruits as well. We mentioned it. We've got a full list of who's expected to come to the game this weekend in terms of recruits, but is there anyone else that people should maybe keep an eye on, or, see if you guys have any updates on them after this weekend?
Yeah, there honestly are probably too many to still list them all, but I will list a couple others. I think intriguing to keep an eye on Mike Tyler, who is the Hammond School tight end. He's committed to LSU currently, but was in Columbia for the Akron game. He's expected to make the short trip over on Saturday as well. It just feels like early in the process, honestly, it felt like both sides were kind of feeling each other out. I don't know if the mutual interest was as strong then. Now it feels like, from what I've been told, the mutual interest has kind of ratcheted up. South Carolina has been after him harder. He is visited more now. If you look at, again, he was at South Carolina for Akron. He's going to be over there on Saturday. So both sides have sort of ratcheted up the interest. And so, I think that's one to keep a very close eye on. I look at Josh Smith, another local guy. He's from Dutch Fork, linebacker. I think we talked about him on one of the previous episodes, Kendall. Emerging guy. He actually, interestingly enough, has SEC offers from South Carolina and Ole Miss. So this is a big game for him to get over there and watch. But that's one where I think South Carolina has the momentum with him as well. He's a 3-star linebacker that is sort of rising up. You get into this 2026 class, a bunch of major offensive linemen will be on campus. Jalen McGill comes in, 4-star guy. He's really emerged as like a priority target for South Carolina at running back in that class. So, Kendall, you can see with these 2026s that South Carolina is not only building momentum with the 2025s that are starting to maybe make decisions soon, but these guys who will be making a decision in, 8 months, 9 months from now, going into next summer, you're really seeing how, all right, if you're visiting twice, 3 times early on in the season, that means you have pretty heavy interest in that school.
Well, speaking of making decisions, it gets real when you start to come on official visits. South Carolina's got one this weekend, really important one. So what do you got on that, Wes?
Another flip candidate here, Kendall Damala Ajitahun, is a 4-star offensive lineman from committed to Georgia Tech. So, I mean, that's got to be a trend for the early going to this season so far as well. It's just the number of guys who South Carolina has had on campus for a football game that have been committed to other schools. So he's been on campus already as an unofficial visitor. Now he will get the full experience this weekend as an official visitor. And it's not just South Carolina trying to flip him. So this is not one where I can sit there and honestly say, like, hey, Carolina is the favorite to flip him. I think it's more like Georgia is after him hard. Ohio State's after him hard. South Carolina's after him hard, obviously. And then, of course, Georgia Tech's doing everything in their power to keep him. They've done a really good job with that program. Brent Key taking over, a former O-line coach in his own right. So I don't think Georgia Tech's just going to lay around and let these other schools take him either. So that's kind of become one of our big boy recruiting battles all of a sudden. But one to keep an eye on this weekend, though, Kendall, just in terms of if that visit goes great, if South Carolina is able to really continue to grab his attention, then who knows what can happen. As we know, they've recruited incredibly well out of the high school ranks on the offensive line. Lonnie Teasley, Sam Serbay, the recruiting assistant, those guys have done a fantastic job reshaping that position. So certainly one on Sunday. Check back with us on Gamecock Central because we're going to be trying to get some feedback on exactly how that one went.
Yeah, we always say it, but head over to GamecockCentral.com. That is where you are going to get your up-to-date instant analysis from all of our lovely staff, including Wes and Chris, who work so hard to make sure they are keeping you updated with all of the visits that happen when South Carolina plays at home. You love to hear it, right? You hear Georgia, you hear Ohio State, you hear South Carolina is in the mix with those schools. That is where you want to be if you are the Gamecocks. If you want to reach your fullest potential, you got to compete with those schools that are the best in the country when it comes to college football. So a lot happening this weekend, lots and lots of recruiting news certainly coming your way. Visit us, GamecockCentral.com and at Gamecock Central on social media channels. Plus, we got a big one. I'm back in Columbia this weekend for the first time in a long time. My first game in over a year. I cannot wait. I can't wait to see so many familiar faces. It's going to be a blast. And my brother and I have a little bit of beef going on because he went to law school at Ole Miss. Of course, I'm a proud graduate of the University of South Carolina. So it's going to be a fun one. And I get to see you. I haven't seen you
I'll be there.
a long time. It's been like a year, hasn't it?
Yes, it's been.
I mean, I see you, and I talk to
No,
you.
it's been. You came to a game last year. I don't remember what game it was.
Mississippi State.
Yeah, that was like, what, the second?
Yeah, it was early on. It was in September. Yeah. So, yeah.
Year.
I'm excited. I get to see
what's going to be fun.
GC crew.
Huge game.
Let's go. Yeah, it's going
to
be
atmosphere.
So much fun. Great atmosphere. Y'all have fun out there. Be safe. We appreciate you joining us here on the Recruiting Rundown on Gamecock Central. So for Wes Mitchell, I'm Kendall Smith. Have a great day, everybody, and enjoy your game day. Tomorrow, we'll see you soon.